The fog clung to the green fork as if it had learned to love stone. It pooled in the hollows where the river's breath drifted cold, and it trailed its fingers against the flanks of gray horses and wet leather and the spines of spears, and it made the twins look less like towers and more like two pale cliffs rising out of a drowned world. The river muttered beneath the bridge, and the drums within the castle beat a slow pulse like a fatigued heart. Ravens watched from the crenels, black as oil on a winter sea. Catelyn Stark drew her cloak tighter across her shoulders, feeling the day's damp creep through wool to bone, and studied the banners that stirred in the windless air. The silver trout of Tully, the running direwolf of Stark, the flayed man of Bolton hanging lurid as a tongue-bitten bloody, the roaring Mormont bear, the mailed fist of Glover, the pine of White Harbor, Umber's roaring giant, and more besides. And on the far side, above the thin, clattering line of Walder Frey's men, the twin gray towers on blue, stacked like a blade turned side-on. Her hands wanted to be about her daughters, both of them, all of them, to pull them close to count breath and warmth. It was a mother's dream and not a lady's work. The older she grew, the more she understood the cruelty of titles. She watched Robb's horse move through the press with the unstudied grace of a young king who had not yet learned to feign his weariness. He wore his father's face when Dawn was young and the mists had not yet burned away. Wind teased at the brown of his hair. Gray wind flowed at his side with that uncanny silence of a dire wolf, pupils wide, nostrils drinking everything the fog would give him. "He watches as if the air has teeth," Catelyn said softly. "The air does have teeth," said Brynden Tully at her stirrup, his mouth a wry cut beneath the hook of his nose. Blackfish indeed. His hair was more iron than it had been a year ago, but he sat a horse like a man who remembered rivers under summer sun. "The twins bite all who cross. I told your father once, before you were wed, Walder's towers will outlast the hills, and so will his grudges. Best we cross with our heads bowed and our knives sharp." "Walder Frey's grudges outlast even Walder Frey," Catelyn said, "and he is old as old stones. He will want to make us feel the weight of our need. Aye, he'll make you count it too, and tally with his bony finger. But he'll open. He must open. He knows what he gains." A torch kindled high upon the inner parapet. It seemed to Catelyn that the light snagged in the fog and tore it like gauze. Lame Lothar Frey came slowly out upon the bridge with Black Walder at his shoulder, and behind them the file of trumpeters and drummers. Lothar's smile had the thinness of a cut. He bowed and the drumbeat changed. "Your Grace," Lothar called in a voice soft as dust. "Lord of Winterfell, King in the North, our Lord Grandfather bids you welcome to the twins. He is greatly pleased that you have kept your word." Black Walder's eyes were pebbles of jet. Catelyn watched Robb rein in and consider these two, who had once looked upon him with a peculiar mixture of awe and disdain and calculation. He lifted his helm, so they could see the trueness of his face, and smiled with the charm that was not his father's at all but his own. "Lord Lothar," he said, "cousin now if you'll have me, I thank Lord Walder for his welcome. I have kept my word, and I shall keep it again. We had to ford 3 swollen streams and a pride of ill-tempered cattle to reach you. The North is stubborn, even in its rivers. You will find House Frey equally so," Black Walder said. "Then we shall be stubborn together," Robb answered, and swung down from the saddle. Grey Wind's ears twitched. The direwolf's hackles lifted as if some smell had found him through leather, iron, and fog. Robb put a hand to his neck and the beast's quiver eased. Men made way. Catelyn slid from her horse with Brynden's help and felt the bridge's old stone through the soles of her boots, felt the way it hummed with river and wind and blood. She remembered crossing as a girl, a woman, a wife bringing her husband back to war. She remembered asking this place for mercy once, and hearing the laugh that came back. Walder Frey's hall was smoke and light, and the rank scent of too many bodies pressed too closely together. The smell of goats and old wine and men who had been wet all day and did not care. Candles guttered in their sconces. Reed mats muffled the floor. The Lord of the Crossing sat upon his high seat with 5 different cushions beneath him and a fur across his knees, though the hall was not cold. His brood spilled around him like the overflow of a too full cup. He smiled, and it made his face an old boot creasing. "So the young wolf," he said before they had finished announcing him, "has come to keep his word, and no bastard lady hidden in a cloak, no, nor some pretty river girl to tell me my quarrel is with her bed and not with him. Your pardon, Lady Caitlin. The years have not been kind to me, but my tongue is still a guest I cannot teach manners." "They have never been kind to your tongue, Lord Walder," Caitlin said with courtesy so polished it showed her reflection in her mind. "Yet it still serves you better than most men's." "Ha!" he said shortly. "I dined with your father once when my hair was not all white. He said you had a rasp under your silk. Never knew if he meant to praise it. He turned his head like a bird. Come then, let us see if my little Roslyn suits you, boy. If not, we've a full henhouse to pluck from. Roslyn, my duck." A young woman stood from the press of maidens and sisters and daughters and cousins. Roslyn Frey did not lift her chin to make herself seem taller, as some girls did when brought to meat they must eat whether they liked it or no. She did not shrink. She came forward with her hands clasped so lightly that Caitlin could see the tremor run. Ing through them and made a curtsy that would have done Riverrun or the Red Keep. She had eyes the color of well water and a mouth that wanted to smile and feared to do it. Her hair was brown, threaded with sun where the torches caught it, and braided simply, neat as good stitching. She looked younger than she was and old enough to know she was being watched. "Your Grace," she said to Robb, and when she lifted her eyes to his, Caitlin saw his own surprise. "Lady Roslyn," Robb replied, his voice even and kind. He had learned, at least, to keep his heart behind his teeth. "I am your very humble servant." Lord Walder snorted. "He will be your husband if you do your work well. Come, let them look at one another a moment. Then let us call the septon and be done." "We will mark both gods," Caitlin said at once, and Lord Walder's brows met like two gray caterpillars. Aye, the old red tree and the new bright seven. I know it. The Freys bend to all breezes." The old man looked pleased at his own wit. "And when they blow in every quarter, we build walls." No one laughed but lame Lothar. In the silence, a servant slipped by with a cup of wine that had a hair in it. Walder swatted him off. They married before the seven in the sept that crouched like a blunt-knuckled hand between the towers, with a faded maiden gazing down from dusty glass and a crooked warrior whose sword bent toward the window. The septon's voice cracked and smoothed and cracked again as he droned his vows. Robb spoke clearly. Roslyn's voice trembled on one word and grew very brave for the rest. When the septon asked if she would take this man for her own, she looked at Robb and did not look away, though the old man was coughing and muttering and the hall beyond the sept was beginning to beat its impatient drums. Then, under a sky that had turned from fog to pearls to the dull lit of pewter, they stood beneath a patched canopy of rain-spotted blue while Caitlin, as Robb's mother, bound their wrists with a ribbon white as snow. There was no heart tree here, only a withered old elm in a courtyard that had seen too many winters, but Robb touched bark after, and shut his eyes, and in that moment Caitlin thought Ned must be somewhere close, must be. She looked up, expecting ravens to stir in the leaves and say his name. The leaves did not move. Walder Frey's feast suffered none of the restraint that Caitlin had begged for in her prayers. It suffered none of the malice she had dreaded, either. There were no crossbows out of shadows, no knives under tables, no discordant pipes shrieking treachery. There was only the slap of drums and the thin, twitching music of Freys who loved not notes but noise, the reek of cooking meat, the gloss of fat on lips, and the squeal of laughter as young girls were kissed by men who had kissed 100 just like them. The bride's father wept noisily into a great napkin, and then complained that the wine was too sour to wash away his tears. Grey Wind lay under the table at Robb's feet and put his head on the king's boot. Sometimes he lifted his muzzle and growled, a low thing that made several Frey boys keep their distance. Robb drank little, ate less, and smiled when he must. He danced with his wife, and Caitlin watched the way he bent his head to hear her and the way Roslyn's hand lay against the dark blue of his sleeve without clinging and without fear. He danced with Lady Valda and Meege Mormont and a very old Frey widow who scolded him for stepping too solidly. He danced with Caitlin once, and when he put his hand upon her waist she felt the bones of him through king's cloth, felt the youth and the hunger and the weariness she could not shield him from. He whispered, "It is done," and she answered, "It is begun." In a corner near the kitchen door, Brynden Tully was drinking with the great John and Daisy Mormont, who clapped one another's shoulders as if trying to set each other's bones. "I like her," Daisy said. "She does not prink. Pretty face that doesn't know it's pretty. That's worth 5 Freys with jewels in their hair." "She's a Frey," the great John said, offended and merry as always, though he had seen 2 of his fingers chewed by the king's wolf and laughed at the blood. "I'll not sing her name until she's borne 3 sons and none of them squint. Sing quietly if you must." Brynden's eye shifted. "They have too many ears, and they use them like purses." Caitlin tried to rest on the fringe of all that sound and light. There were moments that evening when she thought she felt something crawling beneath her skin. The sense that she had stepped off a bank and not yet struck the river, that there was falling yet to come. It was only the memory of fear, she told herself, the shape of the hole she had stared into for so long. Fear is a habit. Pride is a habit. War is a habit too. Yet here, if anywhere, it might be broken. When the bedding came, Walder Frey had to be reminded to smile rather than weep at the thought of carrying his new-made granddaughter to the bridal bed. It was lewd and comic, as the beddings of the Riverlands had always been, and Caitlin endured it with her mouth set in a way that sometimes made men mistake her for angry rather than enduring. They stripped Robb to his braes with more reverence than usual. The wolf at his side was likely the reason. They stripped Rosalind to her shift and a scatter of pins, and she went blushing down corridors with her chin up and her eyes straight ahead, and Caitlin, 100 memories beating against her like birds in a roost, thought of her own wedding night and of a man who had smelled of oil and smoke and whose hands had shaken once when he bound her hair. Later, when the hall had emptied of its worst noise and filled with quieter songs, when men lay snoring like felled trees and girls whispered in clutches like clusters of grapes, Caitlin went to the outer wall to breathe in the river. The night had darkened enough to show are the lanterns on the far bank like a string of fish's eyes. She hugged herself against a wind that was not so cold as to be bitter but sharp enough to remind her of how winter waits, patient as a cat. She thought of Bran and Rickon and Sansa, 1 missing and 2 dead if word could be trusted, and of Arya. "Oh, Arya, Lady Caitlin," came a voice that was not quite respectful and not quite insolent. She turned to find Roose Bolton in the doorway, his face the usual unreadable pale thing between the points of his hood. He had drunk nothing at the feast. The flayed man on his doublet seemed to blush in firelight and go white again when he moved, as though it were a living thing shivering with heat and cooling. "My lord," she said, "I am to remind you of the council at dawn," he said. "The king would ride within 2 days for the neck. He would know what each man makes of the road." "The road is wet and drowning," Caitlin said. "We had to drag carts out of mud as thick as porridge 100 times. My son knows that." "He will know it again from 20 mouths," Roose said, and in the privacy of the shadows his mouth almost curved. "He has a talent for bearing our repetitions. Bear he must." Caitlin studied him. "My lord, you have served faithfully. There will be rewards when this is done." "Rewards," Roose said. "When this is done. That is a phrase men have been saying since I was a boy." He inclined his head like a man offering courtesy to a corpse. "I shall come with the dawn." When he had gone, the air felt colder. She stood a little longer, until the slow roll of the river soothed the restless thud in her ears. When she turned for her chamber, a shadow detached from the wall and stepped into her path, moving with a confidence that made her reach for the knife that was not on her hip. "Do you know me?" the shadow asked, and the voice stabbed her through the ribs. The lantern found a small face under a boy's cap and eyes that had stared into the dark too long, and that mouth she had loved and despaired of 1,000 times. The shadow was a girl and a boy and a wolf and a dead, and it threw itself at Caitlin's middle with such force that she had to catch the rough stone to keep them both from falling. "Mother," Arya said into her cloak, after the fierce, child's grasping hug had turned half into a choke. "Mother, it's me." For the space of the next breath, the Hall of Frey and the War of 5 Kings ceased to exist. Caitlin sank to her knees on the rushes and took Arya's thin face in her hands as if she were trying to mend it. The child's hair had been hacked off like a boy's. There was grime ground into her skin. There was a scar along her forearm that made Caitlin's eyes sting. She kissed belly, brow, knuckles, and then held her at arm's length, starving to take her in. "How?" she said, and then the words became so many that she could not gather them. "How did you? Where have you been?" "In the Riverlands," Arya said. "Everywhere." "It doesn't matter. I came with a man who... He's down there, he'll be gone if we don't." She looked over her shoulder, hungry as a fox. "You have to hide me." No, I'm not. Hide him, I mean, he's..." She frowned, thinking with a new weariness that looked wrong on her. "He was Joffrey's dog, but he isn't now." Caitlin did not know then whether to laugh or to call the guard. She gathered Arya to her and kissed her hair, biting the smell of travel and sweat and horse. "You are safe," she said like a prayer. "Does Robb know?" Arya's grin flashed then and showed the childhood that had been busy not dying. "I ran into him first," she said, and Caitlin's breath failed. "I ran right into Grey Wind. He knew me. The rest came in a rush. How the hound, Sandor Clegane, had taken her at the inn, not kindly and not cruelly, how he had wanted ransom and then had not. How he had brought her to the twins to sell her to Walder Frey if he could not find the king. How she had slipped from him when she saw the king's banner at last. Caitlin imagined the man, scarred with fire, lurking in the dark under some arch or cart, waiting for the coins that would not come. She thought of a dozen laws to name him by, and none of them fit well. "Show him to me," she said, "but we will bring him under guard, and then we will see what a king will do." They found Sandor Clegane where Arya said he would be, in the lee of a grain cart with a half-empty skin of wine and an unnatural stillness that was more like weariness than fear. He rose when he saw Arya and then saw who was with her and went very still again, and something moved in his eyes that was not quite scorn. "My lady," he said, and his mouth made the words with distaste but not insult. "Your whelp's a slippery one." "She is my daughter," Caitlin said, hearing a tired steel in her own voice. "And you are a dangerous man. And your son is a king," Sandor said, looking past her into the dark where he could smell gray wine without seeing him. "I am not blind. I want my price." "Your life," Caitlin said. "For hers. That's fairer than most queens are," Sandor said and laughed without humor. "I'll take it." When the guards came, he threw down his sword with an almost theatrical contempt. Brynden Tully watched him as if he were measuring lengths. "This is the dog," he said. "He is a man," Arya said furiously. "Every man is some other man's dog," Brynden answered and left it there. Robb came to the yard with his hair tossed and his tunic half done, and for a moment Caitlin saw the boy who had laughed in the kitchens and skidded through mud as if born for it. He stopped dead. Grey Wind brushed past his leg like water and put his big head under Arya's hand. The girl's small fingers found the beast's skull and held there as if touching a star. "You're alive," he said, and Arya made a noise that was both laugh and sob. He took her in his arms and sighed into her hair in a way Caitlin had never heard before. After, he looked up, at the hound and at Caitlin. "You brought me my sister," he said, "and you took her. I have little use for men who take, and less for thieves who take from me." "She begged me not to give her to Lannisters and Freys," Sandor said. "I thought you might be worth more." "I am not a coin," Robb said, "but I am a king. You may have bread and meat and a safe road. You may have leave to go where none of my roads run, and no one will trouble you. You may keep your sword. You may drink enough to forget my face. But if ever you come to my lands with a Lannister's badge again, I will send you back to your master without your head." Sandor's face did something small and strange. "I've had my fill of lions," he said. "I'll take my bread. And a horse." "You'll take a horse from the Freys," Brynden said dryly. "I would not dare to give you a Tully horse. It would bite you for your ugliness." "A Frey horse will throw me for it," Sandor muttered. He looked down at Arya. "You keep that wolf near," he said, an odd gentleness in the roughness. "He knows what men are like." I do, Arya said. Better than you. I believe you. He shouldered past the guards without waiting for the escort promised, moving like a storm cloud clearing a hill. They did not sleep much that night. With dawn came gray light, and with it came the council Roose Bolton had promised. Robb sat at the head of the table with a goblet he did not drink from and Rosalind at his right hand, her hair braided in the married knot. Catelyn watched the way the girl's eyes moved. She was not dull. She was too careful to be dull. The Karstark's defection gaped us, the great Jon rumbled. We are not yet healed, and the Lannisters fattened themselves with roses. We cannot run south to meet them in such bloom. We'll snag in the thorns. The north should be our next bread. Our bread, Robb said, and our bones. The Ironborn flay the coast. They hold Moat Cailin. My father's house cannot be whole while they sit astride the road and cut it. The neck is always bad road, but with men like leeches on the stones it becomes no road at all. Lord Howland Reed will not let leeches feed long, Meege Mormont said. He is a silent man, but he bites deep. I will send a raven to Greywater Watch, Catelyn said. If it will find it. It will find him if he wants it to, Brynden said. It is always so with that bog. We may also send men by White Harbor, Wyman Manderly's envoy offered, a thin man with a confident throat. If your grace will bless such a venture, we can ferry a good number to the Rills and Bear Isle in time. The Rills are mine, a man from Barrowton said stiffly. We need not ferry men to others' coasts when we have our own marshes to drown them in. Peace, Robb said. We are not divided by rivers. We are one river. He looked to Roose Bolton. My lord, you know Harrenhal's roads and also the swamp ways. What say you? Roose's eyes were as pale as rainwater. I say the Ironborn rot where they sit, he said in a mild voice. Moat Cailin is a nasty nest. They cannot come forth except in files to be butchered. They cannot be relieved easily. If we leave them, their sores will fester and kill them for us. If we strike at Torgan Square or Deepwood Motte, we will bleed them at the flanks while they starve on the spine. Robb's fingers tapped the table once, twice. That is true, but while they hold Moat Cailin, we cannot move our wounded, our grain, our messages. The north will not feed us through swamps. We will move on the moat. Your grace, Catelyn began and then stopped, because she heard Ned in the way Robb's jaw set. She adjusted. If we do it, we must do it with allies who can breathe water and walk on mud. The Crannogmen, Lord Reed, ask them to be our feet. Robb looked at Rosalind. Lady, he said quietly, in a way that made a hush ripple among men not used to being asked for counsel from girls. You have sat in this hall all your life. You know the trident as well as any man here. Rosalind startled a little, then gathered herself. The river will drown wagons now, she said. You must send what you can on rafts or boats. If you do, my lord grandfather will send men to see them safe to the Green Fork. He owes you a safe passage that kisses your heel as it goes. Our thanks, Robb said gravely. Walder Frey's mouth tightened and loosened. Lame Lothar smiled the smile of a man who had counted 2 more coins than he expected. They planned until the day dimmed to afternoon and the afternoon sank into a fairy of shadows. When the council broke, Robb and Rosalind walked the yard together beneath a sky that threatened rain and did not deliver it. Gray wind paced them, and Catelyn watched from the gallery, her hands on the rail, and measured the space between her son's smile and his eyes. She will try, Brynden said beside her. That is something. She is brave, Catelyn said. She is young, Brynden said. She is brave and young. So was Robb when we crossed the neck the first time, Brynden said. He does not grow older. He grows sharper. Knives break if you sharpen them too long, Catelyn murmured. Night closed around the twins like a glove, and in the morning they left. The river shucked off its fog for once, and the sunlight on the water made the castle gaze at itself and admire a little and sneer a little, like a vain old man. Walder Frey stood at the gate to preen and tap his cane against the stones as the host went forth. The long, sighing line of men and carts and horses and dogs and boys who would be men soon enough if the gods were cruel, and of girls dressed as boys who would be dead if the world had its way. Caitlin breathed in the smell of turned earth and damp wool and thought, "We are a moving forest." They marched, and like all long marches, this one contained weeks and the feeling of 2 days. The land changed the way a face changes in grief, subtly and with a logic that hurts. Lower, wetter SMA. Their trees, more birds that sounded like whistles and bones, fewer hamlets, more toads. The road became a rumor. The first of the Crannogmen met them in a mist that came before dawn and went back into the reeds when men tried to chase it. They wore green-brown skins that made them into moving shrubs, and they smiled with their eyes rather than their mouths. They spoke in soft, frog-smooth voices. They took Robb among them with a courtesy like a hand on a forearm. It felt to Caitlin that he vanished into the marsh and returned altered, knowing a new language that was mostly silence. They met Howland Reed in a place that could not be found by anyone looking for it. He came out of a stand of reeds like a memory surfacing from a dream. He was smaller than Caitlin remembered Ned describing him, or perhaps men whose stories are large diminish in the telling. He wore no iron, and his gray-green eyes were as cool as water. He embraced Robb as if they had been brothers. "The marsh knows your name," he said, and there was just the ghost of a smile under it. "It hears your feet and says you walk like your father." "I hope to do so," Robb said. "I hope you do not," Howland Reed said gently. He walked into a blade. Caitlin swallowed. "The moat," Robb said, turning the word over like a stone. "We must pry them out." "You cannot pry leeches," Howland said. "You burn them, or you grit your teeth and pull, and you take a strip of skin with them." He looked toward the invisible south, where stones older than names held their ground. "The Ironborn are sick. They will be sicker when they smell smoke they cannot find. The marsh eats men who do not belong to it. We will help it chew." They played every trick the neck had taught its own. They drove bog fires with reeds set alight in patterns no Ironborn could read. So the smoke slipped through the stones and made throats raw and eyes weep. They lay dead logs under the water that could take a man to the hip in gray suck with no warning. They sent frogs to sing at night until Ironborn lies sounded lonely even to the ears that told them. They poisoned no wells, for the neck had taught them all that thirst is a god, not an enemy. They whispered in the reeds, and the reeds whispered back. Robb did not ask his men to do what he would not. He wore mud up to his knees for days and nights and learned to taste the difference between a safe brown water and a dangerous blue one. Gray wind vanished and reappeared in fog like a piece of it that had learned to have teeth. Caitlin watched her son be taught patience by a land that had none for the impatient. She had not wanted to love the bog, but she found she loved its small red flowers that were toxic and brash, and the way the bite of it was clean compared with the cruelty of castles. Moat Cailin itself rose from the slough like an old beast too stubborn to die. The 3 towers stood like broken teeth, and the causeways came to them like tongues. The banners of the Ironborn hung limp and stained with salt. The air smelled of old rain, smoke, and a kind of weariness that lived in the lungs like a squatter. It was not a wall you took by storm. It was a wound you dressed and then waited to see whether it would rot or knit. A fortnight taught the Ironborn that their glory was mildew. The ravens they sent did not get out. The fish they caught gave some of them fevers that shook them like wheat. They tried to sally, and 24 died scrambling in the muck like beetles kicked on their backs, while 12 more vanished into holes that were not there the day before. They learned, the 3rd time, to cower behind their stones. Ralph Kenning, big, blond, with a narrow, stubborn mouth, came to the parapet the day the reed fires looked like pale banners. He shouted in a voice hoarse with smoke that he would speak to the boy king. Robb rode to the end of the causeway with water up to his horse's belly and 2 reedsmen standing so still beside him that they might have grown there. "You cannot hold this," Robb called, "and I will not see more men drown buying you a death that flatters you. Yield the moat. March out with your arms bound and your heads unsevered, and I will see you from the neck with food for the road. You'll not keep your iron, but you'll keep your breath." "The drowned god keeps our breath," Ralph Kenning croaked. "He has kept your cough," Robb said. "You won Blacktide and Harlaw with ships. These are stones and water. This is not your god's place. There is no place that is not his, Kenning said, but Caitlin heard the wobble. Tell your men what you told them in secrets, Robb said. That the Kaelin you hold is a stone around your ankle. You will pull all your men down with it. The wave that does not go back breaks. Kenning wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. We are ironborn, he said, but I will not have my men die like frogs. They gave up Moat Kaelin with sullen pride and unexpected relief. The reed folk watched them drag themselves through the water with their arms tied and their faces made for the sea. Caitlin found no joy in their humiliation. She found only a cool calm, like the feeling you have after a fever leaves your bones. Wyman Manderley's men met the Ironborn at the edge of the marsh with carts of bread and smoked fish. Kenning stared at the food as if it were an accusation and then took it with a brief nod that was almost gratitude. We'll be gone from your coast soon, he said. Caitlin thought, you will be back. That is what a tide learns to do. The moat gave them the north. They rode under skies that opened and closed like gray lids. They rode with reed men at their flanks and the smell of pine and damp old stone. When they came to Winterfell, it was like finding a wound on your own body that you had kept covered. Seeing it made it worse and made healing possible. The broken towers showed their inner organs. The walls were charred in places and cold to the touch. The great hell. I was too open to hold its own heat. The heart tree's face had blackened a little along one cheek where a fire had licked, as if some god had tried to kiss the weeping and done it too hard. Smoke had stained the stones that had been Ned's hands. Robb dismounted in the yard and stood a long time without moving. The others did not speak. Even the great John lowered his voice. Grey Wind went ahead of his master into the hall and then came back again, whined, trotted out to the godswood, returned, circled Robb with unease, lay down, rose. It was like watching grief that could not find purchase because everything was room for it. They buried bones that were not stark at all, burnt so badly that their little mistaken skulls looked as if they had smiled too long in some terrible light. Robb watched without a word. After, he went to the crypts with a torch he did not need for light because he knew every step. Caitlin followed him. They stood before the statue that had been Ned's father and the one that was Ned's and the one that was empty because there are statues you cannot carve yet. The torch sank its smell into the air and made shadows writhe like cold eels. I named John, Robb said, and Caitlin's mouth went dry. At Riverrun, you know it. We will make it proper when we can. If I die, the North must have a Stark who is not a shadow drawn by a southern crow's quill. You will not die, Caitlin said gently, as if she were coaxing him down from some mad height. Not while we have breath to give you. People die while others breathe, Robb said. We know that song. I have thought often of what you did, Caitlin said. Naming John. I was in such a rage that day I could hardly feel my hands. You must forgive me that. Your father loved the boy, and the boy was a boy not to be hated for a man's sin. It was not sin, Robb said. His mouth twisted as if at some remembered thing. It was some other kind of debt. He never taught me how to name it. We never had time. We never have time for what matters, Caitlin said. We must make it. They stood long in the cold under the earth. When they came out, the sky had a small clean blue hole torn in its gray, and it let down a light that made the frost on the stones glitter a little. Winterfell looked then for a heartbeat like it might remember itself. Rosalind stood in the yard with her cloak pulled close and her hair pulled tighter. Arya had made friends with a boy in Manderley colors who could throw a knife and catch it by the blade. They were showing one another things they ought not know. Will they come? Caitlin asked later in the rebuilt solar with its one good window. Who? Robb's head was bent over a map of the north with a nick cut into the paper where someone had marked the place where the Dreadfort's banner had been seen last. Roose Bolton. Others. Men who will see this and think of the wardenry that might be theirs. They will come, he said without looking up. They will bring us men and bread and flattery. They will think of wardens. They will think of that seat. He touched the inked tower drawn where Winterfell stood. They would be fools not to think of it. Roose Bolton is no fool, Caitlin said. No, Robb said quietly. He is not. He sent ravens to Carhold and Deepwood Mott and the Dreadfort and Last Hearth and White Harbor and Bear Island. The ravens came back with letters tied to their legs, some elegant and some as awkward as left hands. The Umbers sent their giants' laugh and their men. The Manderleys sent their silver and their ships, and a poem Wyman had written about wolves that was not very good but very long. It praised Robb as a silver moon in winter, which Caitlin thought odd and sweet. Carhold sent nothing. The Dreadfort sent a promise that was perfect as a blade and meant to cut. Roose Bolton came himself. He came quiet. He came the way noon comes on days when you are too busy to notice morning ending. His bastard did not come with him. Robb met him in the hall and kissed him on both cheeks as if the gesture might impose warmth. "We have the moat," Robb said. "We can funnel men north and Ironborn south. The neck is ours again." "Ours," Roose Bolton said. "That is a word with small borders and big teeth." "Everything we say has teeth," Robb answered. "The Ironborn," Roose said in a voice that almost yawned, "are a wave. They have broken once. They will gather and break again. We should salt the shore while the tide is out." "We will," Robb said. "But first we must cut the rot from inside. Your bastard has been busy." Roose's eyes flickered, which was to say they moved at all. "Bastards will be busy until the end of days," he said. "They are born to it." "He holds Theon Greyjoy," Robb said. "He burned my towers. He flayed men in my father's yard." "He is my son," Roose said. "I do not often bother with love, but I recognize blood. I will bring him to heel." "Bring him to me," Robb said. There was no heat in the words. There did not need to be. "Alive." "As your grace wishes," Roose said and bowed. They rode on the Dreadfort with more snow in the air than Caitlin liked and fewer men than she would have chosen if she were given 7 more years to make the choice. They did not ride openly at first. They cut the road behind them with crannic tricks so that a man who wanted to follow would think twice about his horse's legs. They passed Barrowton, where the hill rose with old bones under it, and the Barrow Kings sat in their stone sleep and heard the alarming silence of winter gathering. They crossed white fields where the last of the autumn sheep picked at stubble beneath the pale gleanings of sun. The Dreadfort loomed out of that pallor like a bruise, ugly and dark. It had never been a welcoming place. Now it seemed worse for the eyes turned inward at it from a wolf's vantage. Men had stories about the way flesh fared on those walls. It was not a stomach Caitlin wanted to look into, yet she would. Ched as the scouts came back in pairs, as the small fires along the battlements burned close and then closer still, as the gate did not open for a herald's call. Ramsay Snow was not in the Dreadfort. Roose had suspected as much. Caitlin knew because Roose's nostrils flared once when he looked at the gate and once again when he turned away, and that was as much as an outcry from him. The bastard had somewhere else. The bastard liked to ride with a small pack and do harm with a large echo. He had likely taken Theon Greyjoy to the place men whispered his name as if they were trying to spit out a taste they could not find. Robb ordered the flanking move. Men moved. They found Theon at a hunter's haul out in the Wolfswood. Not a castle. Not even a holdfast. Just a stout house full of bad memories. He did not look like Theon Greyjoy. He looked like a skin that had forgotten what it had covered. He looked as if a name would fall apart if you said it at him. Arya had wanted to see him, to spit, to ask him where Bran and Rickon slept and in what breath. But when she saw him, she did not speak. She made a small sound and went away. Robb stood over what had been Theon and said nothing at first because he had learned from the marsh how to be a man who waited. Theon lifted his head and showed teeth that looked as if someone had tried to file them down. "My king," he mumbled, and then chuckled in a way that made it worse. "I was your father's ward. He taught me to love you. You betrayed me," Robb said at last, and the words lay down between them like stones. "You burned my home." "It was not me," Theon said in a rush that had raw, ragged edges. "It was the bastard, Ramsay. His mouth trembled and then stilled as if he'd heard a voice inside and was listening. "He made me. I made him. He's good with meat." Caitlin's stomach twisted. Roose Bolton stood at the back of the room like a particularly patient shadow. She could not read the man. She did not want to be able to read him. Robb looked down at Theon, and something like pity moved under his voice and showed its flank and then slipped away. "You are my prisoner," he said, "as you were in truth when you were my father's guest. I will keep you this time." Theon's eyes filled with something too watery to be tears. "Keep me," he said dully. They set a trap for Ramsay Snow at the Dreadfort's outer lands. A simple thing with sticks and bait and men who knew how to be trees and men who knew how to be wolves. They used Theon as meat. Catelyn despised herself for it and approved. Ramsay came for his toy as men always come for what they think belongs to them and cannot be taken. He rode with a handful of dogs and a handful of men, and he came with the smile of a child who had found a new way to pull a fly's wings off. The forest rose up. The dogs died quieter than their master. Ramsay screamed once when a spear took him through the meat of his thigh, and he screamed again when Grey Wind took his blade arm in his teeth. He did not scream when Robb's sword went in under his rib. He made a soft, surprised sound, like a man in a whorehouse discovering that his coin had bought him a library, and then he was a piece of red on the snow. Roose Bolton watched his bastard die. His face was not a face for grief. He looked as if someone had moved one of his chessmen, and he had not decided whether it was better or worse than what he would have done. Later he walked aside with Robb, just the two of them and Grey Wind ghosting between the trees, and Catelyn followed at a distance she thought discreet and found there were words you must hear even if you do not wish to be the kind of mother who hears them sneaking. "You killed my son," Roose said. He said it as if remarking on weather. "I killed a murderer," Robb said. "I killed a man who flayed men on my father's land and who burned my home. I killed your son because he had made himself into something that eats sons." Roose's breath went out slow and went back in the same way. "If I tell you that I had hoped to tame him with honors," he said, "you will laugh." "I will not laugh," Robb said, and he did not. "I will tell you to stop hoping. Some men are less than that and more dangerous." "I am good at hoping," Roose said, "and at stopping." He lifted his eyes at last. "You know, of course, that there were those who would have made me Warden of the North, if I offered them what you could not give." "I know," Robb said. "I know Lord Tywin made promises as if they were seeds he meant to plant on our graves. He thinks the North grows in red soil. He is wrong." Roose's mouth tilted the smallest degree. "He is dead," he said. "The dwarf killed him." Robb's head jerked. "What?" "Ravens run faster than horses when they have this kind of meat to carry," Roose said. "The boy king choked at his wedding upon wine or kindness. I cannot tell which word you will prefer, and the dwarf husband took the blame. He escaped his cell and found his father on a stool. Someone says he put a bolt through the Lord Tywin's belly as the man felt it fill. That is a good jest of the gods. The small lion has made a wound that will not clot as easily as the others." Robb stared at him for a long time. The trees sighed. "How do you know?" he asked at last. "Because I cultivate the listening of men who talk to whores," Roose said. "And because Varys the spider had a bird that passed through Harrenhal once upon a time, and we have never since seen the end of that silken thread. The capital is a nest that has been poked. If you go south now, you will shoulder into a chaos that will not see you coming. If you stay, the North will knit to you like a wound that wants to be a scar." Robb's hand dropped to Grey Wind's head. The beast lifted his eyes and showed a pale gleam. "And what would you have me do, my lord?" "Wait," Roose said. "Winter is nearer than it was last year. The dead will have their own war if the stories men tell when their cups are empty and their hearts are full are true. The wall sent ravens. I have read them." "Have you?" Robb nodded. He had not told Catelyn. He had not needed to. She had seen it on him the day the Crannogmen had shown him how to move without making sound. "I have read them," he said. "Mance Rayder pounds on the wall. They say he brought giants out of old songs. They say men rode mammoths larger than halls. They say many things," Roose murmured. "They say, as well, that a king has come from Dragonstone with fire in his eyes and hunger in his shrunk belly, and he has driven the wildlings back. Stannis Baratheon will make a better enemy than Tywin Lannister. He is the kind of man who takes a debt from you merely by looking and saying nothing. He will require your knee." The question is whether you have so many knees. I have one, Robb said, with a sudden, fierce, weary grin that was pure Ned and pure Robb both. And it will bend when it must or not at all. I will not have the north dragged under another Southron man's tapestry. But the wall is the wall. If the dead march, there will be no tapestries to admire. Caitlin closed her eyes. The wind under the trees had begun to smell of snow that would not melt. They gathered at Winterfell's broken hall to speak of it. And the voices of the northern lords rose and fell like the grumbling of an old man who cannot rise from his bed. The great John wanted to ride at once, to spill wildling blood and find the stories under the stories. Wyman Manderley wanted to send bread, then men, then ships burdened with both. He had a good heart for a man stitched in fat. The Mormonts reminded them that bears know snow better than wolves do. Roose Bolton said little. When he spoke, he said, "If we go, we must not empty ourselves. The Ironborn wait always. The Lannisters may send a host without a lion at its head. The Tyrells will grow thorns as soon as they have no lion to fall upon." Caitlin listened to all of it and remembered that men love wars in which they get to be right. The decision was Robb's and his alone. He took it into the Godswood, which smelled of rot and holiness, and stared at the blackened cheek of the heart tree and the bright new flush that had come beside it since the last rain. He came back with snow on his hair. "We will go," he said. "I will go, but we will not empty the north. Lord Manderley, you will hold White Harbor's teeth up. Meege, keep Bear Island in claw. Brynden, you will stay at Riverrun and keep my mother safe and Edmure honest. Lord Bolton, I will hold the Dreadfort," Roose said silkily, "and the lands between with my teeth and my tongue." Robb nodded. "Do so." It was a quiet thing, the leaving again. There had been too many leavings for it to feel like anything else. Caitlin kissed Arya on both cheeks and tried not to fit her into the shape she had been. "You cannot come," she said, because Arya had already put a knife into her belt. "I know," Arya said. "I'll practice. I'll learn the names of all your guards so I can go past them whenever I want." "No," Caitlin said, and Arya grinned, because she understood that no means little in some mouths and not enough in others. Caitlin held her anyway. "You will write," she said. "Even if you only write that you cannot write. You will look for Sansa." "I will," Arya said, but her eyes gleamed with something that did not look like looking for sisters. It looked like hunting for herself. Rosalind stood with Robb and touched his sleeve once, and then did not touch it again because there were eyes upon them. "You will send for me when the road is open," she said. "I will send," he said. "Do not die," she said very softly. "I do not think I could bear it and keep living, and yet I am supposed to do impossible things." "I will not die," he said, in that reckless young way of his that had brought men after him into bad and good both. "Not before I bring you a better hall to sing in than Lord Walder's." She laughed, a quick, surprised sound that made 3 old ladies look up. "Bring me a quiet kitchen," she said, "with good knives and no blood on them." Robb's smile went crooked. "I cannot promise the knives," he said, and the sorrow of it moved through the hall like a cool draft. They rode with a hardcore north and then farther north, past the last farms where the cattle had long horns and suspicious eyes, past the last crofters' huts where smoke rose like prayers, into the land that has no patience for men's imprecise words. They saw watchers on the hills, who turned their horses and went like smoke when spotted. They saw the marks of camps that had held too many and moved too slowly. They saw bones that were not old enough to be entirely clean. They saw a sky that had decided to be white for weeks. They felt the wall before they saw it, a cold that was not wind and not winter and not lack of fire. It was the idea of cold, as if the world had forgotten warmth and were trying to remember how to say it. When they saw the wall, the great John swore quietly. It made men into ants. It made horses into toys. It made kings into men again. Castle Black was a place of black and white and men who looked like they had been living in a long-breathed nightmare. The brothers of the Night's Watch led them in with relief they could not quite make into welcome. They did not know yet who they were thanking, a king or a feast or a reprieve. Samwell Tarly. Soft-eyed and brave in a way Caitlin could have kissed him for. told a story with many voices in it and a fear that made his hands sweat while he spoke. She wanted to lay a hand on his sleeve when he spoke of a cold that moved and did not make wind, of shadows that broke men, of a sword that broke when it should have cut. She did not. Jon Snow stood and did not know whether he should bow or embrace. He did both, in an awkward turn that Robb met with a fierceness of love that broke something in Catelyn she had thought braced. Jon's face was older than it should have been. His eyes had a set to them she had seen in men who had stood in halls where arrows were coming in through the shutters. She had wanted to hate him. She had done it so well once that she had hurt herself with it. Seeing him, she knew that Ned had been right to give love to the boy. He was worth love. She swallowed. She said, "Jon." And he said, "My lady." In a voice that made her hands ache to put themselves on his hair and press, the stories tumbled. Stannis Baratheon stood in a chamber that had known cold fires for 1,000 years and watched them as if they were a problem that would solve itself if he glared long enough. Melisandre of Ashai stood behind him with eyes like red smoke and a necklace that burned without flame. She smiled at Robb as if she knew his name in a language men do not use. Davos Seaworth was there, too, shorter than Catelyn had expected and with a pragmatism burned into him like a brand. He looked at Robb Stark as if measuring a plank he might walk upon if the sea required it. "You are a king," Stannis said without bowing. "And I am the king." "I am a king," Robb said. "You may be. The chair you sit in will decide that. I have decided only what is mine." "It is not yours," Stannis said. "The realm is one." "The realm is many," Robb said, not with heat but with something stubborn as frost. "But the dead are one. They do not count borders. I am here for them." Stannis's eyes were made for seeing where a word cut. "You will bend the knee and I will use you," he said, as if stating an equation. "I will bend the knee," Robb said softly, and Catelyn felt her heart trip. "When it is time to settle men's business, while the world's business hangs over our heads like a sword on a rotten string, I will hold my head up and you may choose to strike me or not." It was not what Stannis had expected. Melisandre's mouth turned at one corner. Davos made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, as if something improbable had been said in his hearing and made sense. Stannis scowled, and Stannis in a scowl was like a storm deciding whether to split a tree. There was a waiting before the crack. "We will see the dead," he said at last. "Then we will see what the living are worth." The days that followed belonged to the wall and to the stories of it. They saw men from beyond it with hair like torches and women who rode better than lords. And they saw a man who was a Magnar. And they saw a giant whose death had turned into a story everyone wanted to tell with their hands. Catelyn found that all her lessons in politic grief were useless here. None of this had a shape yet. The North's wars had been men's wars, soft-bellied with pride and grievance. This one would make pride and grievance into food and eat them. There came a day when the air pressed on the ears like hands and the light went wrong and the ravens that had been living in the watches flew with a pattern that made no pattern at all. Men moved without talking. Robb stood in his furs and leather with gray wind at his side, and Jon Snow took his place beside Stannis Baratheon as if the space had been carved in the ice for him alone. Catelyn stood behind them with a sword at her hip that she had learned to carry with the knowledge that she could use it and hate the using. The dead came. They did not come with banners. They did not come with trumpets. They came the way a cold comes, invisibly, and then all at once they were there. The first of them moved with a grace that insulted men. Its sword shimmered like frozen water in a world where water had never known heat. The breath of it made the very light look thin. The men around it put their spears out like hedgehog quills, and the thing laughed without sound and broke a shaft with a motion delicate as a seamstress's, and then it put its blade into a boy who had been cracking jokes in the yard this morning. The boy went down like a story shut. Robb shouted then, a human sound that fought the cold with breath. Gray wind leaped at that blue blade with fury greater than sense. Jon Snow's sword flared briefly with a strange dull light that Catelyn could not name. He had another blade, then, not the simple steel she had seen on him 2 days past. Stannis hacked like a man who had learned late how to be angry and never forgotten the lesson. Davos fought the cold the only way he knew, by standing where heat belonged. What followed would be told and told again and change, because any fight with the dark is a story and a prayer both. The thing that had come first died as such things die, slowly and all at once, when a blade that remembers how to break a frozen thing found it. More came. Fire mattered. Dragonglass mattered. Ordinary men mattered because they stood and did not run, because when one fell the next did not. Robb fought with a contained, almost savage clarity that made Catelyn think of the way he had looked at the map and at the empty place where Sansa should be. Jon moved with that same fatal grace he had as a boy when he moved through the snow behind Winterfell, only now the snow made more sense to him, perhaps, than men. She saw him, once, look at Robb over the shoulder of something that was not alive and not dead and nod. Robb nodded back as if they were still as they had been at 12 and 13, passing a secret over a stolen cake in a warm kitchen. After, when the world chose to let breath be air again, they stood upon the ice and counted. The counting took long. Some men would not be buried because they required different fire. Some would be sung by the watch and not by any house. Some would have no singing at all. It made a stark arithmetic. One we owed, one we keep, one we cannot afford and pay anyway. Robb went among the wounded and did not speak, and then he went to Jon and clasped his forearm, and they stood for a while like two trees that had grown together and could not be cut apart without killing both. Stannis came to them and said, "You see." His voice had nothing in it but dryness. "You see what the realm is now." "I see," Robb said. "You will bend the knee," Stannis said. It was not a question. Robb's face did something very small and very real. "I will bend," he said, and all the men around them sucked in breath because a king was saying a thing kings do not say. "I will bend to this, and when this is done we will speak of the rest. If you ask me then to kneel for the South's old words, we will see what the North says." Stannis Baratheon's mouth flattened. Then, with the greatest hardship Catelyn had ever seen a man endure without bleeding, he said, "So be it. For now." They bent their heads, both of them, and Catelyn looked at them and thought, "There is a God's wood somewhere where trees do not know these men's names, and it will not matter, and it matters more than anything." Grey Wind lay with his head upon his paws and blinked as if exhausted by keeping men alive again. Melisandre of Ashai smiled into her red stones and perhaps into other fires. Davos Seaworth met Catelyn's eyes with a tired nod and a look that knew something about losing sons. The ravens flew south with new tales. In King's Landing, the small boy with the crown sat and tried to make his voice into his father's while men and women spoke through him. The Tyrells bent their green into gold where they could. Cersei Lannister crushed a goblet in her hand and watched her own blood drip and knew it was not enough to account for any of it. Jaime Lannister stood at a window and looked at a city he had saved once and wondered whether there would be anything left to save next time. Sansa Stark slept in a bed not hers beside a woman who called herself her aunt and dreamed of snow that was clean and could be shaped into any castle you liked so long as the wind did not come. Somewhere on a cold road, a large man with a burned face drank sour wine and tried to forget the sound a girl had made when she said his name in the voice of someone who might tell the truth. Across the sea, a woman with dragons learned what it meant to be a queen where there were no songs about her yet. In the north, winter took another step into the room, not yet up to the knee, but getting there. Robb Stark walked along the top of the wall and looked east, and then west, and then down where men looked back up at him with the eyes of men who are not sure if they are saved yet. He said nothing because there was nothing to say that would help their breath in the air. He thought of Winterfell rebuilt. He thought of his wife in a hall that did not belong to a man whose tongue had never learned kindness. He thought, he could not help it, of his father in the dark under the earth, and of the way Ned had always known the right word when there were no right words. He thought of Jon beside him and of what he had written in the light of Riverrun's broad windows once. His hand steady and sure. Jon Snow, trueborn son of Eddard Stark, and named his heir. He thought of how Catelyn had watched him do it and had not killed him for it, though the thought must have run through her like a hot wire. He thought of Bran and Rickon, dead in rumor, alive in places where the cold did not reach, perhaps. He thought of Arya, who would not think at all but only act, and wondered whether a knife could keep a girl warm. "Do you ever tire of the cold?" Jon asked without lace on it. I tire of men who make it colder, Robb said. Jon's laugh was quick and surprised. Then this work will be to your liking. Nothing about this delights me, Robb said, and then let his mouth turn up a little. Except that my brother is not dead. Snow began to fall, small and innumerable. It painted Jon's dark hair and made a line upon Robb's jaw. It made the wall into a thing that breathed. It made the world simpler for a moment and then more complicated than it had been. Below, men shuffled in that dance they do when they are waiting for orders that will either warm them or end them. Caitlin watched from the yard and told her hands to be still. She was a mother and a lady and something else besides now. Something winter had made out of grief and iron. Brynden came to stand beside her and did not speak for a long time. He had learned the next lessons, too. I have never liked heights, he said at last, and Caitlin laughed with a surprise that felt like waking. He looks like a king today, up there. He looks like a Stark, Caitlin said. They are the same thing north of the neck, Brynden said gently. For now, Caitlin said, and watched the snow fall on her son and the boy she had nearly hated into nothing, and thought of the babies she had held and the men they'd grown to be, and of how winter had come to the realm with its slow teeth and its long patience. The drums from the twins were behind them now, and the songs of the south sounded like another season's birds. Here there would be new songs, if anyone lived to sing them. She memorized the angle of her son's shoulders against the pale depth of the wall, and she began to compose, in the private place where mothers keep their prayers and lies, a song that would hold him up if he faltered, and hold her when he did not. News ran faster than snow. It carried the tale of a king who had married a Frey and had not been slaughtered for it. It told of a lord whose bastard had died the way his lord had lived, without much fuss and with everyone a little less sure of what anything meant. It told of a king and a king who had learned, briefly, to bend without breaking. It whispered that the south was no longer the only direction in which men might look for the threat that would end them. It made taverns louder for an hour and then silenced them for a day. When Robb came down from the wall that day, when he shook snow from his hair into the eyes of men who smiled reluctantly even while their mouths were stiff with fear, Caitlin met him at the FOT of the great steps and found his face not young anymore, but not yet old. He looked at her as if asking whether she would say the thing he needed or the thing that would comfort him. She did both. You are as stubborn as frost, she said, and it will keep you alive, and it will nearly kill you. And you love me, he said. And I love you, she said. He put his brow against hers in a gesture so childish that men looked away to give them the dignity of being children again. I will bring her to Winterfell, he said. Roslin, I will bring her to a hall that smells of wood smoke and bread and not of old men. You will bring her to a hall, Caitlin said. If not Winterfell, then some other hall we will teach to be the same. You will bring her home. Home, he said, tasting it. Behind them, the wall stood, and the cold swelled, and the world went on being impossible. Southward, a crone drove a cart through a muddy lane, and northward a boy climbed a tree that had never been climbed by any man and looked down on secrets the world had buried in ice, and eastward a dragon turned in sleep. At the twins, Lord Walder Frey counted and counted again and found that numbers sometimes add up to words you do not like. At the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton walked through a hall that smelled of rendered fat and decided, without moving his face at all, that the next time he chose a son he would choose differently, and it would not matter. In White Harbor, Wyman Manderley dipped his quill and wrote another bad poem praising wolves, and laughed and cried and sent ships anyway. In the Vale, a girl who had once been Sansa Stark made a perfect snow castle and saw for an instant the way a world could be gentle if men let it. The winter promised to be long. Promises matter most when they are hardest. Robb Stark had kept one that men had thought would end him. Now he was bound to keep others that might end more. Caitlin looked up at her son and remembered the way he had looked as a boy with a wooden sword. She had not thought then that wooden swords teach you how to hold real steel for your people, but perhaps they do. In the end, all swords are made of the same thing: a decision. Snow fell, and men set watches, and the realm's deal with itself waited until a colder dawn. And there were wolves again in the Wolfswood, for Grey Wind had taken a mate of a sort, and their pups learned to prowl in the aisles of old oaks and to taste the air the way kings do before speaking.